Alright. We're here! We're ready to start recording the video. I'm here to discuss something that's really near and dear to my heart, and that is the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. I felt really compelled to talk about this because there is a new Amazon show coming out this fall that's supposed to be an adaptation of some of his greatest works, the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales, except it's kind of not. It's kind of more just like an adaptation of like the appendices, but that's fine. That's fine. We're still excited, right? It's gonna be a good thing, right? Well, maybe. Perhaps. Or it could just be an unmitigated marketing disaster. As many of you have probably gleaned at this point, I'm kind of a huge fan of anything this man ever wrote. I read The Hobbit when I was 10 years old, and once I finished that, I started devouring the other books as quickly as I could get my hands on them. This is the Silmarillion. This is my copy. This is what it looks like, because I've read it so many times that it's fallen apart. Before we start talking too much about Amazon's series, The Rings of Power, it might be useful to kind of talk about the history of adaptations of really popular fantasy IPs. Now there's kind of one really big one that you guys might have heard of. HBO's Game of Thrones adaptation was a cultural juggernaut during its almost 10-year runtime, last couple seasons notwithstanding. Game of Thrones was, of course, a record-breaking success for HBO. It earned 59 Primetime Emmys and was nominated for far, far more. It was also considered one of the most in-demand and most pirated television shows of the early 2000s, and routinely trended online as the audience theory-crafted about what would happen next in its labyrinthian storylines. Some people even named their kids after people in this show. Game of Thrones' massive success kind of proved that fantasy wasn't just a genre for LARPers and losers anymore. And I'm allowed to say that because I am a LARPer and a loser. As more and more companies began to launch their own streaming services in the late 2010s, they also began producing their own fantasy shows in an attempt to recapture that GOT magic. And of course, recapture those subscribers, and even more importantly, their dollars for their streaming platforms. You'll probably recognize some of these fantasy shows from the last couple years: The Shannara Chronicles, The Witcher, Carnival Row, Shadow and Bone, The Wheel of Time.
But they were all of them deceived, for another fantasy show was made.
In July of 2017, Warner Brothers and the Tolkien estate began shopping a potential television series to various studios, including Amazon, Netflix, and HBO. By November 13th, 2017, it was officially announced that they had secured the deal for a TV series and a few new book publications as well. But that wasn't the only news that broke in November of 2017. In a shock to some fans, Christopher Tolkien announced that he would be stepping down as the director of the estate before the year's end. Now, for those who are not familiar, Christopher is kind of like the gatekeeper of this entire fandom. He's J.R.R. Tolkien's son. Christopher spent years of his life working to organize and publish his father's writings after his death. We owe the publication of the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, The History of Middle-earth, and many, many others to Christopher's efforts. So for him to announce that he was stepping down almost the same day as the show announcement, well, y'all ready to roast this thing or what? As much as it would be fun to like just kind of roast this and, you know, drive the hate clicks, and the algorithm would absolutely love that, that is not what I want to do in this video. Make no mistake, I could go on and on about how I feel about the changes they're making to the lore, the timeline, the costumes, etc. And if there's interest, I will absolutely do a video on that. But I haven't seen the final show, so it's not necessarily fair of me to go into a tirade about all of that, at least not yet. I don't want to be 100% negative about the entire thing because it's not really constructive to rage that hard, even if it does feel a little bit cathartic. So for this video, I wanted to focus my energy on something constructive that easily could be improved, and that is the marketing for the show. So let's start with the first piece that they released. Now you're probably thinking, well, wouldn't they just like announce that in a press release? But it's kind of a weird reason, I think. I understand why they did it this way. The Rings of Power show is a prequel set thousands of years before the Fellowship of the Ring or The Hobbit. Its narrative should be drawn from the Lord of the Rings appendices and a handful of other novels and notes that Tolkien wrote about the Second Age. Unfortunately, because there isn't a full novelization for some of these texts, and Amazon doesn't have the rights to some of these anyway, there's not really a full official title for this time period that they're adapting. So Amazon has to create one. All things considered, this is actually fairly solid as a video. While I'm not 100% sold on the voice work yet, the visuals are very well done. The ad also manages to bridge the gap between casual viewers and hardcore fans alike by referencing the well-known introductory poem in Lord of the Rings. It even has a nice bit of foreshadowing if you're really into the Lord of the Rings Second Age lore.
9 for mortal men, doomed to die.
And I don't know, I think it worked out alright. If only I could say the same about some of the other items here. The next piece that had the fandom speculating for quite a bit was a series of character posters that were released on Twitter. These posters look pretty nice, though I have two main criticisms about how they actually did this. From a design standpoint, I really appreciate the guts to try a different approach to poster design by focusing on the character's hands. It's a gutsy artistic decision that allows us to check out some of the cool details about the costumes and the props, which is really cool because a lot of times, if you're a production designer, a lot of your work probably doesn't really get noticed, but this is cool, you can see some of that now. But from a more callous and cynical business marketing standpoint, I don't think this was maybe as awesome as it could have been. And here's why. This approach doesn't let me make any connections with the project, specifically with the actors. While this production does not have any huge Hollywood names attached to it, there are at least a few recognizable faces with a few okay credits to their name. Let's play a little game as an example. So here's the name of one of the actors in the show. Who is this guy? Have you heard this name before? I hadn't. But maybe you recognize this face, at least a little bit vaguely. He looks kind of familiar. I mean, I think I know him. I've seen him in something... Hey, thanks for playing, Robert. Because his poster doesn't show his face, nor indeed even his name on the image itself, we don't get an opportunity for this moment of recognition for casual audiences. This is true for every character poster. Also, as stupid as it is, humans really respond well to seeing other human faces. We see faces in clouds, the surface of Mars, or even in pieces of toast. Including faces does seem to make a difference in engagement as well. YouTube thumbnails are a great example of this principle at work. As Joe Vikes describes it in his article, "Your pretty face is going to sell," a YouTube user discovered that including a facial reaction tended to boost views further. Over time, view count metrics gradually pushed these facial reactions into more exaggerated expressions. Getting attention on social media platforms requires creating content designed to perform well within their ecosystems. Everything must contort to please the almighty algorithmic gods. So listen, I don't love this trend. Nobody likes having to make posters like this. But I called it callous and cynical business marketing for a reason. Almost every other fantasy series with an ensemble cast has done this. For a reason. The Rings of Power posters, in comparison, are very artistically interesting, but perhaps not as effective as they could have been at letting us get to know your cast. There's also the issue of when each of these was rolled out. Most of them were published on February 3rd of 2022. But most of these didn't actually reveal the character name or the actor for weeks. In some cases, even months after they were originally published. And while there are some completely mentally well people who are checking for this kind of thing, most people wouldn't notice this sort of little stealth update on Twitter. Dumping all the posters at once and then trickling out the names sporadically with no discernible date strategy is just strange. Though maybe not as strange as the next part. One of the other big pieces they released on Super Bowl Sunday here in the United States was a teaser trailer, which, that's great. It's for a television show, so there should be a teaser trailer. Unfortunately, this trailer was not great. There were several general complaints about this trailer among the fandom and with general audience that I'll try to distill here. The first one being that it looked, quote, cheap. This show has been advertised routinely in articles as the most expensive show ever made.
Spared no expense. Spared no expense. Spared no expense. We spared no expense. Spared no expense.
So obviously cheap maybe isn't the right word, but using my client speak translator, I think most people here are reacting to the effects and lighting in the trailer, which looked plastic or video gamey. They don't look like they cost millions of dollars, certainly. The other thing that I saw a lot of people talking about was that this trailer looks kind of generic. Much of the trailer felt very visually derivative of other popular franchises, using generic tropes and not really building on them. It didn't do enough to differentiate itself from the pack of other shows out there, and in a saturated market, that's not really great. Some viewers even felt that the costumes looked more like cosplay than a, million-dollar production. However, for myself, I think the most damning part of the whole trailer was that there isn't really any sort of recognizable narrative in any of this. Compare this to similar length teasers for competitor shows like The House of the Dragon, which, while equally sparse in many regards, did give us some indication of the story, along with having a lot of recognizable characters and settings. An even briefer example would be the teaser trailer for Season 2 of The Crown, which is kind of a masterclass in editing. I love almost every trailer they've ever done. But listen to this piece of dialogue and how much this tells us in like 10 seconds.
There are some of us who are there for you no matter what.
If only.
It feels like just random action clips strung together like pearls on a necklace. And it doesn't really get you excited about what's happening here, especially not as a casual viewer who don't know anything about this. And as someone who has read the books so many times that, they're literally starting to fall apart, I didn't recognize enough in this trailer to get excited about it. So I'm not really sure who they were marketing to here. I guess general audiences, but no one seemed to care about it at all. It just didn't find an audience. Unfortunately, this was not a one-off issue. Alongside the trailer, Vanity Fair released an article, Inside the Rings of Power, on February 10th, 2022, right around the Super Bowl. This article is mostly a puff piece, which is sort of expected, but it is definitely an entertaining one, with lots of information about the production and creative direction the show was taking. Interestingly, as of this writing, it sounded like at least 3 episodes were complete. While I could comment on some of the creative and lore choices they mention in the article, I will stop myself because you guys are not here for that. The more relevant point here is that they released a second article right after this, like within days of releasing this one. Secrets of the Lord of the Rings teaser trailer. Now, on a surface level, this seems alright. This show is a big investment for Amazon, so they're clearly trying to get their money's worth by promoting hard right out of the gate. But on closer look, I think the double release might have been the first sign of damage control by Amazon. I took a look at some past fantasy franchises to try and get an exemplar for their marketing. Like, do they always go back to back like that? And I couldn't really find one. The Witcher Season 1 released an article with IGN within a couple days of their trailer release with a few exclusive photos. Similarly, the House of the Dragon show quite recently released an article with Vanity Fair, but gave no additional details at all, despite having a much closer release date than Rings of Power. I think it's releasing in like August. Meanwhile, Amazon's first article, released on February 10th, was considerably longer than both of these, with far more details, lots of showrunner interviews and exclusive photos and content. The second article, published on the 13th, is similarly detailed, going over every frame in the released trailer. But I can't help but wonder, why pay to release 2 extremely verbose articles back to back like this? Especially considering their marketing efforts haven't really ramped up yet. At least of this recording. I think the answer lies in the fan response to the first trailer. Now, earlier I mentioned there were some criticisms of the trailer. It looks a little derivative, it looks a little generic, but I would honestly say that a better word for that might be backlash. Within days, the trailer had generated over 1 million dislikes on YouTube, along with an army of fans and trolls alike commenting variations on, "Evil cannot create, it can only destroy." Which in turn is a variation of a text from Lord of the Rings where Frodo's speaking to Sam and he says, "The shadow that bred them can only mock, it cannot make, not real new things of its own." Now, was this a bit childish and dramatic? Yeah, just a little. Do I think Amazon also got the message loud and clear? Yeah, I do. I think they did. Yeah, definitely got it. Naturally, Amazon's PR team started deleting comments on this video almost immediately, and within 3 days, the second Vanity Fair article with the behind the scenes on the trailer was posted online, but not published in the magazine. All of this kind of weird, release schedule sort of points to Amazon trying to control the narrative around what was happening here. The fact that they felt the need to immediately pay for a second article that goes over every frame of the trailer, it kind of tells me that the trailer missed the mark, much like a bad joke. If you have to explain it, it probably wasn't very good. Around the same time as the trailer drop and the Vanity Fair articles, we got a third piece of marketing that is maybe the most bizarre part yet. They decided to do a piece of influencer marketing. This is a pretty common tactic used to promote your project to younger generations, largely millennials and Gen Z, who typically don't respond as well to traditional media attempts at reaching them. Things like posters or news articles or commercials during massive sporting events for nerd shit. You hire a popular with your demographic person from social media to talk about your brand, or in this case, your show. The problem with this piece is that Amazon kind of selected people who very clearly don't know a whole lot about Tolkien. Now, I'm sure that these are lovely people in real life, I don't want to be rude to them, that's not called for at all, but after I looked these guys up, it was clear most of them were just actors or screenwriters. None seemed to have anything on their respective social media about Tolkien or any of his works at all. And unfortunately, this lack of Tolkien knowledge really showed in the Superfans video, and not just in a few minor details either.
I feel like there needs to be a reason for the rings to be made, right? So obviously with the wars happening, and then
What was the reason? Sauron wanted to corrupt people.
Corrupt and control.
This was honestly so bad, I actually initially suspected that it might have been like a rage bait thing, where you purposely release something that is so far away from what your demographic wants that people will immediately start writing, think pieces on it, and they start getting angry online, and then you promote your brand that way. But I honestly don't think that's what happened here. I think this was actually a genuine attempt at marketing to someone, but I don't know who, because obviously the fans hated this. This got hidden from YouTube almost immediately. But this first failed attempt wouldn't stop Amazon from attempting to bribe up some other influencers, though. After the Superfans debacle, Amazon got real quiet for about 3 months before releasing a deluge of these posts from a few more well-known Tolkien creators. Unfortunately, these creators weren't allowed to actually say much of anything about what they saw at the press event. They did mention that they saw some footage, but not even a full episode. What we saw was footage instead of completed episodes as Vanity Fair's Joanna Robinson saw back in February. But it was completed footage with orchestra score and finished VFX. Now, some of the creators, even though this kind of seems to, they were like, oh, well, we'll be able to release, in time what we thought about what we saw. But there's no indication of when they're going to do that. They're just like, it's great. They're all kind of saying the same thing over and over. We were invited by Amazon too. We feel that the show is in good hands. We really enjoyed the showrunners. The showrunners really know their stuff. As someone who works in media and kind of sees this sort of stuff all the time, the fact that they're all kind of repeating the same talking points tells me one thing. They are likely under an NDA, which, fine, whatever, but they're also probably under a non-disparagement clause, which means that they can't actually say anything about the footage. Or at least nothing negative, really. This means they can literally not talk about what they saw in any detail, and if they do talk, they have to be perhaps more complimentary than you would just seeing 20 minutes of unrelated footage.
So here's what I can say about the footage I saw. I was absolutely 100% blown away. I'm sorry you're going to miss out on something spectacular, what has the potential to be the greatest television show ever made, easily.
I do want to emphasize that I think it's a good thing that they reached out to these creators and, actually reached out to the Tolkien fandom. That's a good move. We want to encourage that kind of thing. But I don't think it was maybe as successful as it could have been. And I have a couple reasons why. The main reason I don't think this got the reception that Amazon was hoping for is because it was done a little too late in the process, and after they'd already had one problem with a piece of influencer marketing. Involving well-known Tolkien fans should have been done 3 months into production, hell, maybe even pre-production, and not 3 months before they're getting ready to actually release the product. By waiting to do this event, it became nakedly transparent that this is a marketing and branding move only, and not an organic attempt to reach out to the fandom. Even if Amazon was looking for fan feedback at this point, it's far too late for any of it to make it into the show. They've already done final edits of at least the first 3 episodes, per the Vanity Fair article mentioned earlier. It also says something to me that they wouldn't show these creators a full episode, but only like 20 minutes of footage. If you're confident in your product, you would think, heck yeah, we'll show them a full episode so they can get the full feel. Why didn't they do that? For all the issues I have with some of the creative liberties they took in the Jackson adaptation, listening to fans was actually something they did really well, and something that the team behind the Rings of Power could absolutely learn from. Jackson and co. involved fans early and often and actually listened to their feedback in many cases. For example, an early draft of the script for The Two Towers had Arwen fighting at Helm's Deep, which was actually shot, at least parts of it. You can see some of the images online. When fans expressed their displeasure with this change, citing that it undermined Éowyn's moment in The Return of the King, the crew actually listened, and her scenes were cut from the movie, even though they were shot. They were transparent from the beginning and not just as something to do at the very end of the process. And on a similar note about transparency, some transparency from the creators and from Amazon in general about this being a paid influencer event would have been very, very welcome. Let me be clear that I'm not necessarily trying to like call these people out or be really mean to them, because they've gotten a lot of hate for this and not all of it is justified at all. But I do think most of them are kind of maybe a little ignorant of how the industry works, and it's not a great look to obfuscate their connections with Amazon. Interestingly enough, there are actually rules about this and how this works. It's called disclosure guidelines. The FTC says the following about when influencers should disclose about being paid for their effort. Disclose when you have any financial, employment, personal, or family relationship with a brand. Financial relationships are not limited to just money. Disclose the relationship if you got anything of value to mention a product. Don't assume your followers already know about your brand relationships. Make disclosures even if you think your evaluations are unbiased. Now, let's compare that to what we saw with some of this. When you claim you weren't paid when you received an all-expense-paid trip to London and Oxford, a free goodie bag with shirts, journals, etc., and maybe most importantly, and not discussed enough, exclusive access to a screening that will drive significant audience engagement to your social media channel, which in turn you get paid from, like where I'm sitting, that kind of says you need to disclose and be more clear about you were paid. It's definitely, you know, maybe in a gray zone, but it is probably enough of an argument there to say that it is running afoul of the FTC guidelines, to say nothing of the stricter EU rules. And while I doubt the content creators are super familiar with this, since most of them are pretty small channels, it's almost certain that the marketing execs at Amazon would know about this. And I think it's really weird that they didn't tell anybody or brief them about it at all. Amazon's team absolutely should have briefed the creators on this. It's baffling that they're allowing the creators to keep claiming they don't have any financial connection with Amazon when that's demonstrably not true. Of course, Amazon has every incentive to massage the truth around this since they've only spent this much money to develop the show. But hey, you know, it's just guidelines, right? It's not like that's ever enforced, and it's certainly not like, you know, a major fantasy IP that's being controlled by a mega multi-million-dollar conglomerate has ever had to deal with this before. Oh, for f***'s sake. After seeing all the marketing for this show, I'm not really sure that it's going to be a very faithful second age adaptation for any of Tolkien's works. And there are definitely some people, you know, who are like, well, you don't know that. You should still really give it a fair shot. Well, the first details weren't great, but wait till you see some photos. Well, the photos weren't great, but the trailer will surely tell us more. Okay, the trailer also wasn't awesome, but I'm sure the show will be. The first episode was just them finding their footing. You have to watch the whole season to know how it's gonna play out. Wow. Listen, I've avoided using the word hate in this review because, again, you know, I'm not trying to be a hate monger here, but I really hate this mindset. There is no limit to how much I hate this mindset. Because frankly, despite what the runtime of this video might lead you to believe, I actually have pretty limited time. And there's a hell of a lot of stuff to watch from every streaming service under the sun. Marketing's supposed to communicate if it's worth my valuable time to engage with your show. And right now, the marketing for Rings of Power makes it appear that this show is not worth my time. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen. I may be eating crow in a few months, but that seems to be the overwhelming impression right now. So how do you fix it? Being honest, I don't really know that you can, because you can't really get a second first impression. A lot of people have already sort of written this show off. But if Amazon was looking to improve, here are a few of my own suggestions, again, as someone who works in this field. Changing the release date is probably the first thing I would suggest, and probably the easiest thing I would suggest. It would probably gather quite a bit of goodwill from the fans, actually. Currently, the release date is set for September 2nd, 2022. Now, for those who don't know, that date is significant to the Tolkien fandom, because it's the date that Tolkien died. Why would you pick that? There have been some claims that this is a way of honoring Tolkien and his legacy, but from where I'm sitting on this side of the pond, it definitely feels more than a little tone deaf. Also, from a purely business standpoint, it's not a great date because it overlaps with the runtime for the House of the Dragon, Amazon's current main competitor in the fantasy space in the streaming wars. In a highly saturated market, you don't want people trying to split their attention between your product and a very similar one. Also, frankly, there's just a better date in September, and that's September 22nd, which is Frodo and Bilbo's birthday. It also falls on a Thursday, which means that people would have a whole weekend to watch the show. This seems like a no-brainer and one of the easiest things you could possibly do to gain some goodwill from the fans. Number 2, start marketing toward your built-in audience. This one, I'm probably going to be getting a little dangerously close to the edge of, making the cardinal sin in marketing of assuming I am the target audience. And normally I would never do this, but I think in this case, I kinda am the target audience, at least a little bit. At least, people like me, people who are existing fans of the franchise. To borrow a crass gambling term, people like this are the whales of your audience. These are the people who will subscribe to Prime to binge watch your show, they'll buy your tees and merch, and most importantly, they'll tell their friends about it. But only if it's good. And if it's bad, well, we kind of saw what happened if it's bad. As Amazon refuses to stop reminding us, they spent $250 million on the rights. This is going to be the most expensive show ever made. So why spend this money for a built-in audience and then not lean into the fandom? Casual audiences aren't necessarily going to be interested in this out of the gate. There are no big Hollywood names attached to the project, and the time period they're adapting from is so far removed from Lord of the Rings that, it might as well be a totally different thing. I also think it's a mistake to assume that book fans will be on your side just because you put Lord of the Rings in the title, as clearly evidenced by most of the discourse in fan spaces online. Indeed, for better or worse, for the first season at least, the LARPers and losers are kinda your guys. To once again bring up the elephant in the room, let's take a look at Game of Thrones' first season. While it absolutely had some big names attached to it, looking at you, Sean Bean and Lena Headey, it doesn't make many deviations from the source material. It instead leans into the source material, making only a handful of changes overall, mostly around character ages and introducing new points of view. Book fans and casual audiences alike both really appreciated it. So my recommendation for Rings of Power: the next trailer release and promo images should focus attention on the truly Tolkien parts of this show, and not your original characters or storylines. At least not for season 1. I've learned a lot about OCs like Arondir, Halbrand, and Theo from the marketing efforts so far, and as of this recording, I really haven't seen anything about actual Second Age characters like Ar-Pharazôn, Miriel, and, like Celebrimbor. Why are they not talking about Celebrimbor? Get the Tolkien lore nerds excited about this show, and it will likely pay for itself many times over.
Where are we? Who are they? What's going on?
Word of mouth can't be bought, but it can sort of be generated if you do it right. Speaking Speaking of Game of Thrones, they did another really interesting thing that I think Amazon could really learn from and probably really benefit from as well. They created animated lore videos that were narrated by the cast of the show. As far as I'm aware, these were all released with the DVD box sets, but there's no reason that Amazon couldn't emulate this style of video. I would release it on YouTube to build hype for their premiere. Along with introducing the second age setting, this would also do wonders to endear your new actors to the audience. And regarding the animation part, Amazon talks a really big game about diversity and reaching out to the fandom, so why not extend that into your marketing efforts? Some of the most beloved depictions of Middle-earth have come from women and people of color. Jean Gao, Fobbs, Iku Kanova, Catherine Kasmina Schmiel, Jenny Dolphin. They're all living and working artists whose images have helped define much of the fandom in recent years, especially for books like The Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, where there hasn't been an adaptation yet. Even Tolkien's preferred artist, Pauline Baynes, was a woman, and while she has passed on, it may be possible to license some of her work. What a fun tribute that could be. I mean, hell, if we're on the licensing train, Amazon could probably even license some of Tolkien's own artwork. It's hard to argue with the man himself. I mean, look, he did his own thing here. You can actually see how he conceptualized different areas of Middle-earth. Can't argue with it. Use this. Why are you not using this? And in terms of artwork, let's see some more behind-the-scenes content. Now, they've recently done this. One of the magazine articles, I think it was Empire Magazine, they showed like a concept sketch for a troll. We should be doing that all over the place. It is wild to me that we've seen one sketch so far. I would love to see stuff about the costume design, the set design. How are you approaching the visual side of Middle-earth? People eat that kind of stuff up, and along with the lore, you're really getting people invested before the show even starts. Heck, let's go back to, again, another great exemplar, the original Lord of the Rings series that Jackson did. The behind-the-scenes portions of that DVD disc set are beloved now. People have uploaded all of those to YouTube again because people like to know how their media is made. Don't keep putting the curtain between us. Show us how it's done. As we wind down to the final moments of this video, you may be saying, Krista, you're really passionate and like you've clearly spent a lot of time thinking about this, but I don't care.
I don't care.
Yeah, shit, I don't care either.
And listen, I kind of get it. Like, between filming this and writing it and like revising it 200 times, I get it. I also am reaching the point where I don't really care. But at the same time, I do actually sort of care about this. And when Amazon has continually marketed this adaptation in the most unimaginative, dishonest, and rage bait way possible, while also appearing to disregard multiple second-age stories in favor of original plotlines, I can't help but be, I guess, really disappointed by the entire production, even beyond the marketing. But why does that matter? It's just a dumb TV show, and you'll always have the books. That's always the refrain, right? You'll always have the books. And yeah, that's true. I will always have the books, and I will probably reread them for the 100th time, regardless of what the show will do. Oh, that's so sad. That being said, I would love to see a really faithful adaptation of this time period. A faithful adaptation of these books would mean a hell of a lot. A whole new world of people could be introduced to Tolkien's wider legendarium, namely The Silmarillion and The Unfinished Tales, two excellent books that deserve much wider recognition than they currently get. Unfortunately, after this marketing campaign, I've kind of already seen a lot of people wandering into fan spaces, you know, who may have seen the trailer or seen a poster and been like, hey, what book should I read to prepare for this series? And I've seen a lot of people just saying, OP, read only what the showrunners have access to. Reading The Silmarillion isn't required for the show, specifically because the show creators don't have the rights to adapt anything from The Silmarillion. Not sure I'd bother reading The Silmarillion or The Unfinished Tales. None of it is going to match the canon. The primary source for the show appears to be the appendices rather than just fleshed out narratives in The Silmarillion or the incomplete drafts and other materials. Probably better to approach this as a blank slate as possible rather than compare the show to the materials and wonder what could have been. What could have been indeed. Alright, well, this is the end of the video. I feel like this was maybe a strange exercise for myself, but I was interested in it, not just as someone who's a fan of the books, but also as someone who kind of works in the field. I hope it wasn't too, like, esoteric or too negative. I've seen a lot of people getting really, really negative online about this series, and it's not entirely called for. There's kind of a perception in the wider world that nerd fandoms are kind of gatekeepy and they're really toxic, and you know, you have to ignore everything they say, and I didn't want this video to contribute to that look. Like I said, hopefully this is good. If you guys have thoughts about, you know, the series as a whole, or maybe even more importantly, like if you were in Amazon's place, how would you choose to market it? I would love to hear your ideas in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Until next time. Bye!